The sun hung low in the late afternoon sky, painting the horizon with strokes of gold and tangerine as the small boat glided across the glittering water. Mia leaned against Daniel, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling the soft thump of his heartbeat beneath his shirt. They had been married only 3 days, and yet it felt as though they had known each other across lifetimes. Every glance, every shared smile carried the warmth of a love they had promised would last forever. The island ahead looked like something out of a dream, rugged cliffs draped in emerald foliage, the faint echo of distant waves crashing against hidden coves. It was exactly what they had envisioned when they'd booked their honeymoon, not just a getaway, but a world apart from everything they had left behind. Their local guide, a wiry man with a weathered smile, had told them about a hidden lagoon few outsiders had ever seen. It's magic, he'd said, only for those who can find it. The idea of discovering something untouched by the usual tourist trails thrilled them. So, after dropping their bags at a small seaside villa, they packed light, just water, a camera, and their sense of adventure, and followed him into the island's wild interior. The trail was narrow, weaving through groves of palms and giant ferns, the earthy scent of wet soil mingling with the salt in the air. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy, catching on tiny floating specks of dust and pollen that shimmered like fairy dust in the air. They laughed as they ducked under low branches, careful of their footing on moss-covered stones. Every now and then, Daniel would reach for Mia's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Somewhere above, the clouds began to shift, pulling across the blue sky like a curtain. The breeze picked up, cooler now, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. The guide glanced upward, a flicker of concern in his eyes, but said nothing. "We're close," he called over his shoulder, leading them toward the mouth of a shadowy cave at the base of a towering cliff. At that moment, the place felt like a portal, an entryway into something ancient and mysterious. They stepped inside, unaware that the first step into that darkness would change their lives forever. The air inside the cave was cool and heavy with the scent of damp stone, a welcome relief from the rising wind outside. Droplets of water clung to the jagged walls, catching the last scraps of light filtering in from the entrance. Mia and Daniel followed the guide a few steps in, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Outside, the gentle patter of rain quickly grew into a steady drumming, and then into a roar. The storm had arrived suddenly, sweeping across the island with a ferocity that made the trees groan and sway. The guide assured them they would wait it out here, just a passing squall, and then continue on to the lagoon. For a moment, it felt like a scene from a romantic adventure, two newlyweds huddled together in a secret cave while nature unleashed its wild beauty beyond the entrance. Daniel slipped his arm around Mia, feeling the way she trembled slightly against the cold. He whispered something to make her smile, and she did. But then the ground trembled beneath their feet. At first it was a subtle shiver, the kind you might feel when a truck passes by on a distant road. But in the enclosed cave, it was magnified, a low growl from deep within the earth. Pebbles rattled loose from the ceiling. The guide's head jerked toward the entrance just as the rumble swelled into a deafening crack. It happened in seconds. A section of the cliff face above the cave gave way, sending a torrent of rock and soil crashing down. The mouth of the cave vanished behind a wall of falling debris, dust billowing into the air, stinging their eyes and choking their lungs. Mia's scream was swallowed by the noise. Daniel's instinct took over. He pulled her down, shielding her as sharp fragments struck around them. And then, silence, except for the faint drip of water from somewhere deep inside. The once wide opening was now sealed by a mound of boulders and earth. The guide's voice called faintly from outside, but the storm carried it away. They were cut off. No way out, no light, just the cold, the darkness, and the sudden, crushing reality that they were trapped. At first, they reacted on instinct, rushing to the blocked entrance, clawing at the pile of jagged rocks with bare hands, ignoring the sharp pain as stone cut into their skin. Dust still hung in the air, clinging to their clothes and hair, making every breath feel like swallowing sand. The guide's faint voice came once more from the other side, but the wind and rain smothered it. Then there was nothing. Daniel shouted until his throat burned, Mia adding her own desperate cries, but the storm answered with only its relentless roar. Their phones came out next, screens glowing like fragile fireflies in the darkness. No signal, not a flicker. The realization sank in slowly, like ice water in their veins. No one knew exactly where they were. No one would come looking until it was too late unless the guide returned. And the storm might keep him away for hours, or days. The darkness deepened as daylight faded, swallowing the cave in black. Their phone lights became their only lifeline, but each glance at the battery icon brought more dread. Daniel turned his brightness down to the lowest setting, Mia switched hers off entirely to save power. They sat close, their knees drawn up, shivering in the damp chill that seemed to seep from the stone itself. It was thirst that came first, sharper and more urgent than hunger. Their water bottles were nearly empty. Searching the cavern by phone light, Daniel spotted a faint glisten along one wall, a slow trickle of water seeping through a crack. They cupped it in their hands, letting the cold liquid soothe their parched throats. It wasn't much, but it was something. Hours blurred. They tried to sleep in turns, but the cold made their teeth chatter and their muscles ache. To keep their minds from spiraling into panic, they began to talk, about their wedding day, about the songs they'd danced to, about the little apartment they'd just moved into. When they couldn't think of anything light, they spoke of dreams, the countries they wanted to visit, the names they might give their future children. In the oppressive blackness, those conversations were more than words, they were a lifeline, a thread tying them to the world outside the stone prison. Somewhere between exhaustion and fear, an unspoken promise formed between them, they would not let this be the end. Not here, not like this. By the second night, exhaustion gnawed at their bodies, but something else had begun to stir, an instinct deeper than fear, the stubborn will to survive. The small trickle of water had kept them alive, but they knew they couldn't wait forever. The air felt heavier, each breath slightly harder than the last, as if the cave itself was slowly swallowing their oxygen. Daniel pressed his ear against the walls, searching for the faintest hint of moving air, and one night, he found it, a whisper of a draft brushing against his cheek from somewhere deep in the darkness. With the dim light of Daniel's nearly drained phone, they began to explore, leaving behind the little space where they had huddled for days. The cave narrowed quickly, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees, the rock scraping their skin. The sound of dripping water followed them, echoing off walls that felt closer. With every step, more than once, they had to stop and breathe through rising panic as the space grew tighter, the ceiling lowering until they could barely move their heads. Then, suddenly, a section of the tunnel shuddered. A cascade of loose stones poured down, narrowly missing them, but when the dust cleared, Daniel's beam of light caught something, an opening, jagged and narrow, leading upward. The draft was stronger here, faint but undeniable. They didn't hesitate. Ignoring the sting of cuts and bruises, they began to climb, wedging their feet into small gaps, pulling themselves higher. The stone tore at their hands, but every meter brought the draft closer, cooler, cleaner. Mia's arms trembled with the effort, her breaths coming fast and shallow, but Daniel's voice urged her on, his words steady even as his own muscles screamed. And then, through the cracks above, a pale light appeared, not the weak glow of a phone screen, but daylight, soft and real. With one last push, they broke through the jagged mouth of the fissure, collapsing onto wet grass under an open sky. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright, but they could only lie there, gasping, holding onto each other as though afraid the earth might swallow them again. The grass beneath them was cool and slick with rain, the scent of wet earth filling their lungs like the first breath after a long dive underwater. For a moment, neither of them moved, too drained, too stunned to believe they were no longer in the suffocating darkness. Daniel's chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, Mia's eyes were shut, her fingers clinging tightly to his as if letting go might send them tumbling back into that stone tomb. Above them, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the storm clouds scattered to the horizon. The sound of distant voices broke through the quiet. Daniel lifted his head to see figures hurrying toward them along the cliff's edge, the guide, his face pale with worry, and several island rescue workers. Relief hit like a tidal wave, stealing what little strength they had left. In the next moment, they were surrounded, hands steadying them, warm blankets wrapping around their shivering bodies. The rescue team led them down a winding path toward a waiting jeep, every step slow and unsteady but pulling them farther from the nightmare. Along the way, the guide explained how he had tried to dig them out when the landslide happened, but the storm made it impossible. Only when the weather cleared could he bring help, and even then, they'd feared they might be too late. At the villa, as they were given hot drinks and tended to by a local doctor, Mia glanced at Daniel and felt something shift inside her. They had come here to celebrate the start of a life together. Instead, they had faced death side by side, and won. The island's beauty was no longer just about palm trees and turquoise seas, it was now the place where their love had been tested, broken open, and reforged into something unshakable. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us tell more true and inspiring stories of hope and courage in the face of impossible odds. Special request to comment. If you believe love becomes strongest when tested, tell us in the comments what this story means to you.